Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Today, I am talking with Jenny. She is a holistic therapist and associate clinical social worker based in Los Angeles, California. She specializes in trauma, artists, creatives, actors, musicians, and adoptees. In this episode, she discusses the grief and trauma surrounding adoption.
Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Jenny. Jenny, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jenny Flora Wells, and I am an associate clinical social worker and holistic therapist in the state of California. I specialize in working with adoptees, artists, creatives, as well as trauma. So yeah, happy to be here.
What kind of led you down that path?
Yeah. So I personally am an adoptee myself and have experienced complex trauma in my life. And I feel like the experience for me of being adopted and kind of moving through that throughout my life has been very transformative and pivotal in kind of pointing me in the direction and on the journey that I am at today. I think that, especially as a young child and then moving into adolescence, there's a lot with being an adoptee of where you are dealing with issues around identity as well as grief and loss. Naturally with adoption, and a lot of people don't know this, about adoption because it is such an underserved area still in the mental health field and in the media in general. But with adoption, like the center of it, the center theme that adoptees deal with is grief and loss. And the reason for this specifically is because, kind of tying this into my holistic approach as well as a therapist, as humans, as mammals, right, our brains are wired for connection. We are very communal beings. So if we are thinking about adoptees and the experience that they go through about being separated from their family for unique reasons to the individual, that loss of the mother and infant bond can cause, adopted infants to lose this fundamental sense of safety and trust in the world around them. And this happens as well with infants who are separated from their mothers due to other reasons as well, right? There's diverse family structures and, a lot of trauma and family separation that happens in today's world. And so this is really, really huge. So yeah, I could talk all day about it.
Well, and I think you're right that that's not something that a lot of people think about. Like you don't think about the grief and the things that adopted children feel. Do you think that there's a difference between, I'm sure they all go through the same type of grief, but like, do you think it's different when they know right off the bat that they've been adopted their whole life versus like when they find out later, or do you think it's the same?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that there's definitely, and this is kind of in my own clinical opinion, I'm sure other people have different views of this, but I think especially with processing adoption, obviously we would prefer for the adoptee to know from the time that they can remember that they're adopted. And so, they can throughout their life kind of process what that looks like for them and their unique story and embracing that to however, that looks like for them. I will say that, adoptees who find out later on in life, especially during adulthood, it can cause more trauma, right? Due to that being placed on them during adulthood after they have formed that identity around themselves in the world and who they are as an individual. It can be very shocking and activating for the nervous system, right? To have that being placed onto somebody. Now, kind of connecting that back to the question that you had asked, right, on if that grief looks different, I think that's a really great question. Definitely would probably be individual, for that unique person. But I think it would be interesting to see if there are different grief processes that one goes through as a child versus understanding and coming to the realization that they're adopted as an adult. So I don't know if I necessarily have an answer to that, but I think that's a really interesting concept that you bring up. And yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and I'm sure it depends on the person some too. Like
Yeah.
some might cope better as a child, some might cope better as an adult. It's kind of hard to say. I know it's like a broad question.
Yes, no, absolutely. But I think it points to as well, though, the kind of the interesting intersection between like developmental milestones and the grieving process. I think that'd be interesting to do specific kind of like research study on. That's a really interesting intersection there.
I'm sure as you know, and as everybody listening knows, the main focus of the podcast is on, infertility and loss.
Yeah.
And adoption is something that comes up a lot in those communities by a lot of, I'll put in quotes, well-meaning people who, just throw it out there like, why don't you just adopt? Why don't you, and it's kind of almost this casual thing thrown out there, like it's the solution to all your problems, but obviously it's not. Adoption's very complex, right?
Yeah. Yes. I think this is being talked about a little bit more than it used to be. Still, obviously, needs more research and more awareness being brought about it. But it is, I think, twofold, right? The comment that people make to people who have experienced trauma around infertility, miscarriages, things of that nature, that can feel very invalidating to the person's experience. Like, oh, just adopt, right? Let's slap this band-aid on this person's experience that is incredibly traumatic, incredibly distressing and exhausting, and so many heavy, difficult emotions to deal with there. And when we're speaking about adoption, right, and the complexities of that as well, what people don't connect the dots on, which makes sense, right? We don't talk about this a lot in society, is also, and I love to talk about this topic, but intergenerational trauma. So with adoptees, we are kind of getting hit twofold, right? It's not just our birth family that we are inheriting traits from and trauma that is passed down from generation to generation, but it's also our adoptive families or our adoptive, situation of whatever that looks like for us that we are soaking in as sponges as children. On top of intergenerational trauma, there are issues around culture, right? And race and gender, and all of the things that make up who this unique individual is. This can be seen with inter-country adoption, international, right, of people adopting internationally, interracial adoption, right? That can be really huge as well. And what that identity looks like for the adoptee and what that experience has looked like for them. And so I think that these are all issues that obviously we need to continue building awareness and education on, because while we do need more people who are wanting to expand their families and adopt, which is a wonderful thing, we also at the same time need to have the education and the background of understanding what adoption looks like and the complexities that come with it in order to be able to properly share space with the child.
Now, I'm not familiar with the whole adoption process, but
Yeah, you're fine.
is there a lot of education that they teach people before when they're looking to adopt, or like do they go over these things and like tell them like that there will be this grief and stuff involved? Or
so that's a really great question, and I've actually been asked this recently, and I need to do further research on what it's like in 2024. Now, I do know from my own family and what that experience looked like for them. Now, this was back in the 90s, so it's a little outdated. So I'm not sure, right, if things have changed. I haven't looked into that specifically, but they do have to take certain parenting classes. I do not think that the parenting classes that they took were centered around trauma, diversity, systemic issues, things of that nature. I think it was more so about being fit as a parent. These are very similar classes that you see foster families need to be trained in. I do know that there has been more extensive and comprehensive courses for foster families, as that is a population that my supervisor works in social work. So I've been able to hear about that. Not sure what that looks like for adoptive families, but additionally to that, in my family's experience, they also would do periodic checks of coming to the home. Again, very similar, to kind of dealing with CPS in certain family situations. So, making sure it's a safe environment, interviewing the family, checking in. I believe it was within that first year of life, and making sure that it was a good fit and a safe environment for the individual. And while all of that is amazing and great for adoptees, again, I think it goes much deeper than that into like the mental health aspect, also too throughout the lifespan, right? How are we addressing the issues that adoptees are facing even beyond childhood? Because it does go beyond that. So yeah, another great question. Yeah.
And I feel like people think, okay, if I get a young child, maybe they won't have as many of these issues, like in quotes,
Yes.
but I feel like even young children are going to be affected by things. Maybe they just can't vocalize it as well.
Yes.
Do you think that
Yes.
it's true?
Yeah, I love that. I love that topic as well. And I do agree with you. I think there is definitely a stigma placed on fostering children or adopting children when they are older than an infant. And there is that kind of, I guess, expectation, right? That, oh, if I adopt them as a baby, they don't know what they experienced or what mother experienced. But there's actually a lot of research that more recent research, touching on the nervous system and somatics and intergenerational trauma that is pointing to pre-verbal trauma and the things that we can absorb even while we're in the womb, right? And that we are inheriting from birth mom. And these are things too that people like myself in more kind of holistic approaches are addressing in therapy, is this pre-verbal trauma and pre-verbal experience that we had with birth mom, because that is a connection, right? We are connecting with birth mom that early. I think there is research as well to support, and again, this is more recent research, so not a lot of money backing it, that intergenerational trauma can be tied back to even the eggs that your birth mom is storing within her, even before you are conceived. So it's very interesting, how far back that goes. But I think that really touches on the true how powerful intergenerational patterns can be and what that looks like for not only adoptees, but all of us, right? And how much that we soak in from our parents and their parents and what that looks like. So to answer your question, I think that it's not that simple. And I think that there's a lot that adoptees deal with, again, kind of that adoption triangle, right? It's not just the adoptive family, it's also the birth family too, that they are soaking in like a sponge. Yeah.
And that really is like interesting to think about, because I'm sure none of us sit here and think about all of our trauma that has come, before us, or the things that because most of us are in, again, in quotes, a traditional family unit.
Yes.
And we don't think about all the other issues that could come up with foster kids and adopted kids and things like that. So yeah, they have a lot on their plate to deal with.
Yeah. And we all do as humans, right? We are such beautiful, beautiful mosaics, culture and background and ancestry. And while it can be overwhelming to talk about all of these things, I think there's also a lot of beauty. There's a lot of strength in our experiences too, our lived experiences, and what we kind of take away from transforming these experiences into something that is empowering.
So what are some ways that you think people can help, like if they're adopting a child, what are some ways that they can help them heal from and, understand the grief and the trauma?
Yeah, great question. And so important, especially in today's world. I think that at the core, if we're thinking about the foundation of allowing your child who is an adoptee to come to an understanding of their own story, is allowing them to express what that looks like for them, right? I think a lot of adoptees are gaslit into thinking, well, you were given this amazing life, and why are you struggling with XYZ if you could have been in this situation if you weren't adopted, right? And so that kind of adds to that guilt and shame too, in addition to that grief and loss that the adoptee is experiencing, and can feel very invalidating to their experience just because it's not something that they, of course, every adoptee is in a different situation of when they were adopted, but just because they didn't actively experience something or experience something for enough time for somebody to warrant it as being traumatic, right? That really discredits the adoptee's experience. And so that, I think, is the foundation, right? How can we share space with them and allow them to express what that story looks like for them and the things that are coming up for them within the body, within the mind? And that can be as simple as, hey, and this is a very simplified version, but hey, I really want to talk with you about what it means for you to be an adoptee. What does this look like for you? And how do you experience this? What are the thoughts that you have around it? What's kind of that narrative? Do you have questions? Is this something that you're wanting to explore, right? Because also there are adoptees who want to learn more about their lineage and maybe want to meet birth family or birth mother. And then there's other adoptees that don't. And that's completely valid, right? That's their story. And so it's like, how can we provide a space where we are being inclusive and welcoming of that individual's experience and not tagging it as being something that's very generalist just because we think we know what adoption looks like. So that kind of being the foundation. But I think in addition to that, if your child who is an adoptee is struggling with mental health issues, or maybe is dealing with some of these issues around grief and loss, or even signs of feeling some of that trauma or that stress or any of these things, I think that if you do have access to an adoption competent therapist or a therapist who specializes in trauma, and especially somebody who has more of that holistic approach and kind of seeing, which basically means seeing the client as a whole being more than just the mental health diagnosis, that can be so transformative for the individual. And that's something in my journey that I feel like I was missing during childhood. I did see quite a few therapists in and out, over the years for adoption related issues, but they all had that very traditional approach, and none of them had any type of understanding of adoption. And so it was very much a how can we think ourselves into just feeling better? And that's just not the case, not only for adoptees, but a lot of people in general, right? We store emotions and trauma in the body, and this intergenerational stuff that we're talking about, like, that's within us, right? And so it's like, how can we see the client as an actual human with all of these different things that make up this beautiful mosaic, and understanding what they need within their journey of coming back to themselves?
Yeah, I think it's hard because I feel like families who adopt, they want the child to just seamlessly meld into their family and be like, okay, you're my child, which, I mean, they are your child, but it's not that easy. And I feel like it's probably hard to be the parent and not feel like, oh, they're being ungrateful for wanting to know their birth family, or things like that. So do you think that issue comes up often?
Yes. And I think that this is very common again. And I think it's more of a systemic structural change that needs to take place, right? Of not only the understanding for the adoptee, but also for the parents, right? And we would hope, and I do think that most adoptive families are very passionate about creating, in their mind, a welcoming and inclusive place where the kid can just seamlessly be in the family, which I know is coming from a great place and I think is wonderful. Can you rephrase the question for me? But my brain went in a bunch of different areas. You could remind me.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I was just saying that I feel parents can think that the children are being ungrateful for not, or for wanting to meet their birth family, for not being appreciative of what they've given them, things like that.
Yes, exactly. And so I think, again, those feelings that are coming up for the adoptive family make sense, right? Because they're like, oh, I've shown you so much love. I really want you to know that you're a part of our family, right? And so some of those kind of the explorative journey of discovering who you are as an adoptee can feel disrespectful to some adoptive families, because it's like, I've tried to do everything to help you feel a part of our family. Why are you seeking for family elsewhere? And so I think, that's definitely, in my opinion, something to explore as an adoptive parent, possibly in your own therapy or own exploration of why specifically are these issues and defenses coming out for me? Is it because, I'm not feeling adequate enough? Is it something from my own childhood, right? Where I didn't feel a part of my own family or what have you. We have these defenses that come out for certain reasons. And at the end of the day, they're coming out from parts of us as well that are wounded. And so that can be a really great starting point. And I think that having the understanding as well that with the complexity of adoption, an adoptee is always moving about that adoption triad. And it's the understanding that the adoptee is not only their adoptive family or their birth family, but also this unique individual, right? And so I think that it's also understanding before we embark on being an adoptive family of, is this something that I'm open to? Is expanding my own view of my own family, right? What would it even look like to, later on down in life, maybe if your child had, or you as a family had a closed adoption, right? What would it be like to open up that family to the birth family, be able to kind of start that communication? What would that look like for you? What would that bring up for you? Would that bring out defenses of, I feel like my child is going to leave for the other family, or whatever that looks like? I also think as well that, having this direct communication and these open conversations with the adoptee can be really helpful too. This is how I'm kind of feeling. Like, I want to be supportive of you in your journey. And, how can we work together as a team, and helping us both understand how to navigate this as an adoptive family and, also in your own journey of finding who you are as an individual.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think including them in the conversations is really important. I mean, just like you would include a non-adopted child in conversations about their feelings and their future, like, so should you with adopted children, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, Sarah, that it's the understanding as well that with any healing journey, but also especially with adoptees, is the concept of nuance, right? It's possible for multiple things to be true at once. And so, how do we allow that to happen? Well, validating the adoptee's experience and also recognizing, this is bringing up these emotions for me. And what is it like for me to sit with that for a minute? Maybe explore that a little bit further instead of pushing it down, right? What does it look like for me to feel sad or upset that this is happening? And how can I have an open conversation in a collaborative way with my child about what this looks like for them and us, and possibly expanding horizons too? Yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes it's so much easier to just push those feelings down and not.
I know. I know.
I don't want to deal with
It
them
feels
right
better
now.
in the moment, right?
Until you have like the big explosion of emotion later, and you're like,
Yes.
oh man, I shouldn't have done that.
Yep, exactly. It's definitely easier said than done, and it's a lifestyle thing, right? It's these small blurbs of practice of opening ourselves up to what it's like to sit with the stillness, sit with the discomfort, because I think we're all taught that with all of our lived experience, feeling anything other than happiness is wrong, right? I think a lot of us were told that growing up. And so, if we can slowly start to change that narrative and that language with ourselves of being comfortable with that uncomfortable, it doesn't become so uncomfortable anymore. It becomes more of kind of curiosity and explorative of what this looks like for you in being human.
Yeah, I think that's a great strategy. I think a lot of people don't do that. Like, I know I don't always do that. I don't sit and say like, okay, but why is this making me sad?
Yes.
I'm just like, no, I'm sad. Like,
Yes.
I don't go into the why, but I think you're right that it is important to do that, because then you
Yeah.
understand exactly what's causing it.
Yes. And again, easier said than done. What is it even like to have, a short practice of that even once a week, right? I notice that I'm sad right now. What if I just ask myself a question? what does sad look like for me? Or where do I feel that in my body, right? The more that we practice something, the more that that's being fired in the brain, and our neurons over time will wire that together as a connection.
So it sounds like really adoptees and the adopters would all benefit from counseling, talking to somebody.
Yeah,
Is that,
yeah.
do you know, is that something that, I mean, I know we kind of talked about this earlier, but is that typically something you think that is included when you are in the process of adopting?
So I'm just not, I really should educate myself on the updated kind of requirements of what that looks like. I'm not
I'm sure it's
sure.
different from state to state too, but
Probably. You're definitely right. And I think too, it would be interesting to see the differences between requirements for fostering versus adopting. I know that, back in the 90s, based on what my parents had said, well, there were a lot of requirements for both. There tended to be more requirements for foster families, which is very interesting. I don't know. It's still such a stigmatized area. It's not talked about enough. And I think that, I don't know. I would assume that maybe the topics that they're touching on are still very surface level. Probably make it more palatable for people to want to adopt or want to foster, which makes sense. And we also need to consider the multifaceted journey of what it means to be human, what it means to be an adoptee, and what that looks like for the individual. Yeah.
yeah, I guess that might turn some people away if you're like, well, look at all
Yeah.
this grief and trauma you're signing
I
up.
know, I know. Yeah. And so
No.
maybe some of it's the marketing of it. I don't know. I
Which
don't know.
sounds kind of sad, right? I mean, it's
I
true, but
know.
they do have to market it, like get people, interested and make it
I
appealing.
know.
But
I know. Yeah, it is very interesting. But I'll be interested to see too, how things pivot as time goes on. I think that we are bringing about more awareness and education around mental health topics that I think have been very taboo or stigmatized from back in the day. And so, possibly with time, I'm thinking that with more information, more people talking about their experience of being an adoptee, that maybe these issues can be further addressed. People are applying to be a foster parent or applying to be an adoptive family. So, yeah.
so are there any particular like resources that you like for people who are looking to adopt or for adoptees that are
Yeah.
struggling?
Yeah. So, specifically with mental health, I know that it's a tough time right now. I think a lot of people are struggling financially, and there's, a lot of people that can't find access to therapy specifically. One of my favorite resources for more accessible therapy for people that might be financially struggling is Open Path Collective. I think that's a really great start. And I believe they have a filter on there for adoption, which can be helpful for people who are trying to find adoption competent therapists. But basically, Open Path is a directory of therapists who traditionally offer very traditional like therapy fees, but they'll open up a few slots in their caseload for sliding scale. So it typically ranges from $40 to $70 a session through Open Path, which is much more affordable. So that can be a great resource for folks who do not have insurance or don't want to utilize their insurance. I also really, really love the app called Insight Timer. I think that this can be a really kind of adaptable type of app for whatever somebody is dealing with. It is free. They have a premium version, but you really don't need it. And basically, it has thousands of recordings on there about there's meditations, all different types of lengths. I think there's yoga practice. There's a bunch of different like healing and calming music. There's affirmations on there. And specifically, what I love about it is there's a search feature where you can look up certain keywords, and there are specific meditations or talks pertaining to that topic. Say I were to look up, anxiety or like adoption or identity. The first thing that could pop up is an identity meditation. This can be a great way for people to explore what it's even like to sit with that stillness a little bit, and having some of that guidance through a recording, of what to do, what to think about, and just kind of exploring what that looks like for them before diving into something like therapy.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check that out. That sounds
Yeah.
interesting.
No, you'll love it. It's amazing. And it also, I think too, it tracks how much you do it too. So it can be like really empowering to see like, oh, I've logged on each day and I've done a 5-minute meditation or what have you. And there's certain things on there that are like 2 minutes long, and then other stuff that's like 3 hours. So it's
So
really,
yeah, it sounds like there's something for everybody on there.
exactly. Yeah. And just a really great way to try things out. So yeah.
Plus, I like getting little like check marks or, whatever, like knowing,
I
yes, I
know.
did it. Like I got my check for the day.
I know it's validating in your own progress. So yeah.
So to be a therapist who is focused on like adoption, did you have to do anything special for that or like any special training or?
Yeah, so I specifically do have an adoption competency certificate. There are therapists who I think have I think there's like one step up from that where you can become like adoption, and I might be phrasing this wrong, but adoption competent, like certified or certified adoption competency. Those are some good things to look for, somebody who does have some training in adoption. If you're unable to find access to somebody who has specific adoption training, even looking for somebody who sees adoptees and has experience working with adoptees and has extensive training in trauma. Like, for example, I have very advanced training in somatic therapy, EMDR, and IFS, which are all modalities that I utilize for, obviously individualized for each client, but with adoptees and people who have experienced trauma, which adoptees are very familiar with. So these can all be good areas and keywords to look up as well.
Yeah, because I was wondering, how many, I'm sure you don't know the answer to that, but
Yeah.
like how many there are out there who specialize in that issue. I wouldn't imagine it's like, as many as like some of the broader things. So
Yeah, I feel like it is still more of like a very niched area of the mental health field. And that's why I'm passionate about specializing in adoption, but also trauma, also artists, right? Because I think, it's also addressing the intersectionality of things, right? And there are some people too that it might be the trauma that they're thinking a lot about, and they're like, I really want to work through my trauma, whatever. And the more that you explore what that self-discovery looks like for you, then there's some people that are more disconnected from being an adoptee and what that looks like for them. And so then they might register like, oh, I was adopted, maybe this could have a bigger impact on me. So I think it kind of depends on the individual and what that looks like for them. But yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, it seems like there's a lot of areas that people are finally starting to do research on, but like that there's still a lot to be discovered and a lot to be done.
Yeah, and I think the difficult piece about clinical research is that these studies are very expensive and largely funded by either larger corporations or grants or things of that nature that don't always want to fund more exploratory approaches or something that is very niche down like adoption, right? That's not something that people are talking about on a daily basis, right? We're talking more about anxiety and depression, and it's much more isolated symptoms instead of like lived experience. So
Yeah, so it's like, let's just figure out how to deal with anxiety, but not specifically anxiety for this group of people.
Yeah, that, and I think that we're still very much as a society seeing mental health in a prescriptive nature, right? How can we isolate one symptom and try to get rid of it? But the reality of that is, where's the anxiety coming from, right? And I think for a lot of people, there is that root cause that specifically the holistic approach is looking to explore further, right? Where is that anxiety coming from for the individual, or where is this grief and loss coming from for the adoptee and their individual story?
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. Everybody just wants, okay, what pill can I take to make this go away?
I
not
know,
like,
and it makes sense, right? And I want to validate that experience because it is hard to be feeling a certain way and to live in a society where when we're feeling something other than happiness and joy, it is seen as a burden or is seen as not what we're supposed to feel. So it makes sense why we would have this prescriptive nature in a very fast-paced and hectic society where that instant gratification is glorified.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's something that comes up too in when you've gone through like infertility and loss is, we grieve the rest of our lives over things
Yes.
that happen, but people just want you to be normal again. Let's be happy again. Let's pretend that didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a part of your lived experience, right? That deserves to be explored throughout the lifespan, right? And with healing, too, what I always like to touch on is like when we are moving through a healing journey, doing therapy, whatever that looks like, it's not going like this, right? It's going to go up and down. We're going to have moments in our life where we're like, I feel like I really worked through this experience. And then something might happen that just really pulls at our heartstrings or, triggers a part of that inner child or that younger experience. And so these are all things that through finding the comfort in the uncomfortable or things that are deemed uncomfortable can be really beneficial over time.
So is there anything else that you would like to share or add?
Yes, I always end with this quote. I love to share it with everybody because I think that there is something so beautiful about even what you and I are doing today, right? Speaking about these issues that, need more education and awareness and sharing our own lived experience and the similarities and the differences with those. And it's one of my favorite quotes by Ram Dass. He is a spiritual teacher and he did a lot of research, I believe it's Stanford, with like psychedelics and like existence and existential stuff. And it's a very simple quote, but it's we're all just walking each other home. And I think that's so beautiful because even beyond therapy, even beyond our own journey, I think that there's something so special about shared experiences, community and connection that really help to validate our own journey and being human and what that looks like for us. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me today, Sarah. It was lovely to connect in our own stories. And yeah,
If people do want to find out more about you, where would they go for that?
my website is jennyflorawells.com. I have a resource page on there for accessibility. I have more information about my services and what those look like and my approach. I will give that to Sarah. And I also have a professional TikTok under the handle Jenny Flora Wells, where I dive into, different mental health topics and just, different exercises that one can do and different quotes and things of that nature to kind of give you a different perspective. And yeah, you're welcome, always welcome in my spaces of the internet.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story and all this amazing information with us.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for providing this space and sharing your story as well. And it was lovely to connect.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing your story with us. I think so many people just casually throw around adoption as if it's something so easy for just anyone to do. Oh, you can't get pregnant or you're facing infertility? Why don't you just adopt? You can't stay pregnant or keep having losses? Just adopt. People don't take into consideration how complex adoption is physically, financially, or emotionally. Adoption's absolutely amazing for those who choose this path, but these people need support, both the adopters and the adoptees. It isn't always an easy transition for either party. I think overall people just need to understand that saying, why don't you just adopt, or there are so many kids already needing to be adopted, are not helpful and they don't apply to everyone. Just think about what you're really saying before, as Jenny said, you try to just put a band-aid on such a complex emotional situation. I was fortunate to not have these words said to me, though I know many others that have heard them. Have you ever had anyone say these things to you? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.